Imagine somebody from 1890. You know, high industrialization. They had those long coats, those really nice neckties. They liked to go to long parties. It was the time of the robber baron. It was the time of great riches and also great poverty, a time of great change. Now, imagine that one of those robber barons was suddenly introduced to a machine that could take him forward in time. Say to the 1950s. Of course, he, being a man of industry, would immediately walk into that box-like thing. It possibly could be blue and boxy and be larger on the inside. I'm not entirely sure. But when he comes out, he sees something completely amazing. 1950s American home, where everything is automated. There's a machine that cleans your dishes for you. There's this metal box that rides up on wheels up to the car that you can get into, and it'll actually drive you. Everything is completely foreign, completely amazing to this robber baron of the 1890s. He jumps quickly back into the, did I say TARDIS? Yes, okay, fine. And jumps to 2019. Then he comes out and he's a bit upset by what he sees because effectively there's been very little change. Oh sure, the design has been updated a little bit. The boxy thing on wheels is slightly sleeker. And yes, there is this small box thing that with flashing lights and things that they call a computer. But from 1950 to 2019, the amount of innovation is sadly, in his opinion, lacking. Then he starts to pay attention to that little boxy thing that gives him all this interesting information, and he finds out some rather frightening things. He finds out about this thing called the Pew Research Poll, and he looks at a poll from 2017 that has charted how 20 years ago the average Republican and Democrat in the United States would have agreed on roughly 50% of any president's policies, regardless of the president's political affiliation. And then he looks at what it is like now, as opposed to 20 years ago, and it's more closer to the single digits, with the consensus moving to the complete fringes on the right and the left. Then he, to his own chagrin, opens up Facebook. After a few minutes of this, he is at once completely enthralled and completely horrified, especially by the stridency of conversation, or perhaps even an impossibility of it. And somebody even suggests to him, after he had unwisely made a comment about a certain marginalized community, a person said to him that since you, a privileged man, are not a member of this marginalized community, you are essentially, as in because of who you are, you have no right, no ability, not even any possibility of understanding, appreciating, or sympathizing with the plight of said marginalized community. So please, shut up. And then he goes even further and reads some research by Dr. Jean Twenge, a very interesting psychologist from the University of San Diego, who has done some rather frightening research on the rate of mental health amongst our young people today. Here are some rather frightening statistics. From 2009 to 2017, major depression among 20 to 21-year-olds more than doubled, rising from 7 to 15%. Depression surged almost 70% among 16 to 17-year-olds. Serious psychological distress, which includes feelings of anxiety and hopelessness, sometimes leading to suicide, jumped 71% among 18 to 25-year-olds from 2008 to 2017. And in the interim, from 2017 to 2019, things have gotten even worse. That's not enough. Some people are seriously suggesting, without joking or without being a conspiracy theory nut, that within the next 10, 15 years, America might be mired in a new kind of civil war, some of which we've seen in places like in Charlottesville. So our robber baron, man of industry, jumps back into the TARDIS and goes back home and says, "Thank you very much, I don't want to be there." What he might not have realized, and what I think we are starting to realize more and more, is that this crisis is a direct result of a centuries-long crisis in Christianity specifically. If we go to the writings of a wonderful Russian philosopher and writer, Ivan Ilyin, who lived in the early to mid parts of the 20th century and survived some of the worst parts of the worst century of human history, he has this to say: everything that has occurred in the 20th century and continues today is proof of the fact that Christianity in the world is suffering a severe, really religious crisis. Massive swaths of the population have lost living faith and have left the Christian church. But having left it, they have not remained indifferent to it. Many have become antagonistic, judgmental, estranged from it. Surely for some the antagonism is passive and cold, but for others they organize a willful battle against it, even though those perhaps still abide by the rules of war. Still others have a fanatical hatred towards Christianity, which we know and we have seen, especially in the 20th century, spills out over into outright persecution. Contrary to what some might think, this is not an issue merely of politics. It's not merely an issue of the progress of history or some other such phenomenon. Ilyin believes, and I wholeheartedly concur, that this is primarily an issue of culture. Writing between the two world wars, Ilyin continues. He says, within the limits of what was formerly Christendom, there is a wide anti-Christian front that has tried to create an un-Christian or even an anti-Christian culture. But this phenomenon is not new. The 20th century, following in the footsteps of the 19th, only manifests a process that has been dormant but developing for centuries. This process of separation from faith, religion, and the church, of culture from those, began a long time ago, and it has been going on for several centuries. In Europe, and in America in particular, secular culture and secularization itself can trace its roots all the way back to the Renaissance. During the first 15 centuries after the birth of Christ, the situation was radically different. And there could be many reasons for this. Possibly people in general were more trusting. Their spiritual makeup was perhaps less complex, less variegated, more instinctive. Maybe they were just less rationalistic. Perhaps they could have been more modest and spiritually careful, or the divine origin of the revelation of the gospel was something that was immediately apparent, vivid, and experienced by them. Perhaps man did not yet feel himself to be a master of nature. Or maybe life on earth was simply just more chaotic. However it may be, it was during this time period that people in general in Christendom considered religion to be the very center of their life. This, of course, is so beautifully represented by the fact that every village in Europe and in rural America always had a church at its center. It was the most important, possibly even exclusive source of meaning and existence for most people. That, ladies and gentlemen, is no longer the case. Ivan Ilyin continues with a short historical survey saying that beginning with the French Revolution and the Enlightenment, the history of the 19th century is one of many attempts to build specifically a spiritually rich culture, but outside of religious prejudice, and without any unnecessary hypotheses concerning metaphysics and the soul. Note that scientific language, very important for this kind of culture. Slowly, a new culture arose that was completely devoid of faith, God, Christ, and the Gospels. And the church gradually found itself in the position of having to grapple with this independent culture, but with very little language or ability to do it. It was as if they were speaking two different languages at each other and neither could understand or wanted to understand the other. What ended up happening was a formation of a world vision that was completely separate from a vision of God. This was helped by the huge leaps made in positive science. These leaps led to ever-increasing practical and technical improvements, all those things that make it possible for us to have a comfortable life, and for me to be speaking to you like this over loudspeakers, of course. All this taken together, however, has so changed the makeup, the strivings, the tastes, and especially the needs of the human soul, that the Christian church, for better or for worse, did not find enough initiative or flexibility within itself to preserve its previous position of authority, which it had It used to be able to tell people this is what is good, this is what is bad, especially in the West. Now, I'm not suggesting that this is necessarily the best way for the church to approach the problem of an adverse culture, but it certainly was the dominant paradigm in the West for a very long time. As a result, modern man has continued to travel ever further away from the eternal truths of Christianity. I use the pronoun we here because we are moderns, whether we like it or not. So we, to some degree, have lost our ability to contemplate these truths. We have habituated ourselves to live without them. And we have also degenerated intellectually and morally. And so the society around us and the culture around us is plunging ever closer to complete crisis, one that is unheard of in the history of mankind. Ilyin wrote these words in 1937. World War II had not yet even happened. He lived to see some of it. And still he remained hopeful. Because we are not the kinds of Christians who run away and dig holes and do not interact with this reality in any way. We know that we have to be mission-minded. Or as Madeline L'Engle would have it, we know that we draw people to Christ not by loudly proclaiming how right we are and how wrong they are, but by showing them a light so lovely that they want with all their hearts to know the source of it. And in America, we actually have a different kind of secularism than the one I've already described to you. Most people that we know who are not churchy or not Christian are not really anti-Christian at all. Often in America, we're dealing with a more complex kind of secularism. You probably have heard of the phenomenon of the nuns. Those who do not really subscribe to any particular religious system at all. They're the ones that say, yeah, I'm spiritual, but not religious. Catholic philosopher Charles Taylor defines this kind of secularity in a very interesting way. He says, in this sense, this secularity consists, among other things, of a move from a society where belief in God is unchallenged and indeed unproblematic, to one in which it is understood to be one of many options. And frequently it's not the easiest one to embrace. We Orthodox know this. The change then is from a society in which it was virtually impossible not to believe in God, to one in which faith, even for the staunchest believer, is only one human possibility among many others. Charles Taylor continues, I may find it inconceivable, he says, that I would abandon my faith. But there are others, including possibly some very close to me, whose way of living I cannot in good conscience dismiss as depraved, blind, or unworthy. And yet they have no faith, or at least no faith in God, or no faith in the transcendent. Belief in God is no longer axiomatic. There are alternatives. And boy, are there many, many alternatives. It's an uncomfortable truth about many of these kinds of secular people. They are not anti-religious for the most part. They just simply don't care. And how much easier it is to battle against someone who comes at you with the sword than someone who simply doesn't know that you're there or doesn't pay attention to your very existence. Here's an example of what I mean. I have a very good friend who's a conductor of choral music, one of the best conductors I've ever worked with, someone who's had a huge influence on me as a person and as a creative person. She conducted choir at Berkeley when I was there as a college student. She was Ukrainian and officially would call herself, if pushed against the wall, a Uniate. She never went to church. If she ever did, it was because there was a premiere of a brand new liturgy written by some Ukrainian expat who had asked her to conduct the choir because it was Ukrainian. She didn't go to church, like I said. But I knew every year that I could only do one of her concert series a year. I could only do the Christmas set, not the Easter set, because every year she scheduled the Easter concerts to coincide with Eastern Orthodox Easter. Not because she was fighting against it as a cultural force, but because for her these concerts were a religious experience, or the nearest thing to it. For her, this was her expression of love for God and her expression of a search or a reaching for transcendence that she could briefly grasp. This was beautifully shown to me one time when we were in Brazil, touring Bach's St. Matthew Passion with 3 different choirs, a huge Baroque orchestra, sitting in a concert hall filled with thousands and thousands of Brazilians who had never heard anything like it. Brazilians don't listen to Baroque music, as a general rule. And in the middle of it, there's this, so the structure of it is there's an evangelist who tells the evangelical story, and there's a series of choruses that comment on it, and those choruses are then interrupted by solos, and the solos have different roles to play. This particular solo was a soprano solo. I can't remember the exact text, but basically she was looking at the bloodied Jesus and saying, why? Why are you doing this? It's an incredibly contemplative moment, incredibly beautiful. Most of the orchestra is not doing anything. The soprano is by herself. She's singing a very ornate piece of music. And Marika didn't have to conduct her because mostly it's a few instruments and the soprano doing what they do. They're professionals. They know what they're doing. Marika is the conductor. So she sat down right on the stage in the middle of all these thousands of people and wrapped her head around in her arms and wept right on stage. And she did this every night. And it was not put on at all. It was a genuine expression of a striving for something that was beautiful. But that was it for her. If I were to invite her to come visit me in Jordanville, she would say thank you. In fact, she did. She drove me there one time after a concert that we did together up in Montreal. I said, you're welcome to come listen to us sing and pray with us at any moment. And she hugged me, awkwardly nodded, sat in her car and drove away. And that was it. She never came. Because that's not what she wants. That's uncomfortable. That's something that's not going, she thinks is not going to give her the same experience of transcendence. Faced with this kind of secularism, I just want to throw my arms up. What can we possibly do? We're seeming to do everything. We're giving them an experience of beauty that is rooted in an old form of religiosity. And yet she still can't make the leap. It's very difficult. It's much easier, like I said, to battle the kind of secularism that comes at you with a sword. So what can we possibly do? Of course, we can't just give up. We are called to be a city on a hill, not a candle under a basket. And perhaps there is a way of doing it. The answer may come from someone who had actually experienced the worst of secularity in the 20th century, Alexander Solzhenitsyn. And he has this to say in his wonderful Nobel Prize acceptance speech. He said, Dostoevsky once let drop the enigmatic phrase, "Beauty will save the world." But what does this mean? For a long time it used to seem to me that this was a mere phrase. Just how could such a thing be possible? When had it ever happened in the bloodthirsty course of human history that beauty had saved anyone from anything? However, there is a special quality in the essence of beauty, a special quality in the status of art. It is this: the conviction carried by a genuine work of art is absolutely indisputable, and it tames even the most strongly opposed heart. That might be it. The creation of works of art that are so spectacularly beautiful that the person has no choice but to start seeking the source of that light. Still, Ivan Ilyin, ever the grumpy Russian, reminds us, for most people, as for Marika, their own light is enough. They don't even stop to consider, perhaps, that the true illumination is the light of God, which leads to God and reveals Him. And people will probably have to pay for this enlightened atheism, which produced all the horrors of a brutal communist regime, specifically because the creative potential and spiritual resilience, there's a popular buzzword these days, resilience, of modern man have been undermined by cultural ruthlessness. So what is left for a Christian then? Should we perhaps just reject culture outright and give it some good Christian reasons? We reject culture on a Christian basis. Perhaps that's the way to do it. Some are okay with this. I've had conversations with priests who try to convince me that this is the way to go. I don't agree. Neither does Ilian. Neither, I think, do most of you. Hopefully all. Because this would be to interpret Christianity in such a way as to deny its power to transform mankind's deeds, life, and fate. To decide that Christ did not come to save mankind, not to call sinners to repentance, not to convert them to new life, but to leave them to perish in their blindness, their debauchery, and their decay. We cannot accept this as true, says Ilian. This is an incorrect interpretation of Christ's role in the world. This would mean a rejection or even a perversion of the profound meaning of the incarnation. It would mean ceasing being a Christian at all. For a Christian is not called to flee the world or to flee mankind, not to reject them nor to curse them. He is called to bring the light of Christ's teachings into earthly life and to creatively reveal the gifts of the Holy Spirit in the fabric, the matter, the physical stuff of this life. And this means that we have no choice. We must create a Christian culture on this earth. Some of you are shaking your heads. No, not Christian culture, please. Because what is Christian culture? Well, let's be apophatic. We're good Orthodox people here. Better to start with what it is not. Christian culture is not the thing that is called Christian culture in most bookstores. When you walk into a bookstore, you look for the Christian section. You know what I'm talking about. These are books that shed all artistry, that prefer message to metaphor, that preach to a very small choir who already believes in something that they're being told. The characters in these novels do not have any development. They are already good in the beginning. Maybe they have a tiny temptation, usually in the form, if the protagonist is a young woman, the form is a heavily tattooed bad boy who actually has a heart of gold. He just needed her to understand him and to show him the path to illumination. This is not Christian art. There is no engagement with the darkness of the human soul. There is no attempt to make sense of the evil that surrounds us, the evil that is in us sometimes. There is no engagement with culture. And sometimes it's not limited to the merely genreified version of Christian culture. Maybe sometimes it goes into something more mainstream. Take, for example, not very recent anymore, but probably many of you have seen The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, the movie version. Probably came out about 10 years ago now. Now, the book is wonderful. It's one of my favorite novels of all time. It's a classic quest, but in a short book of 150 pages or so, it manages to grapple with incredibly deep ideas and topics such as the ultimate fate of man, what will happen to the world, what is sin, what is temptation, how do we make an image for ourselves, and what does it mean to be beautiful? Is it something that's external, or is it something internal, or is it something that's a little bit of both? It's a profound book, and it's for children. Well, that profundity, that metaphor, that nuance, that beauty did not make it over into the movie. Maybe you know what I'm talking about. One of the central conceits of the movie was that all our main characters are going to be at some point tempted, and they're going to have to deal with a temptation, right? This seems to be a rather universal human experience. It's not limited to those who identify as Christian, I would think. I think you would agree with me. Plenty of people are tempted. So why on earth does the audience have to be prompted that, oh, we're going to have a temptation scene right now? Does anybody remember what I'm talking about? Yes. Creeping green mist. Creeping green, oh, temptation scene, here it comes. Creeping green, oh, here we go, they're going to be tempted again. Thereby making all the audience feel like a bunch of idiots and making the message of the movie predominate over its beauty. There were some beautiful moments. They could have done a good job. They didn't, because this was an example of a lack of engagement with the audience, but rather a green-shaped foggy hammer hitting us over the head over and over and over again. What's the problem? They're telling a bad story. They're not telling the right story. This is more important than we might even think, although we probably know this, because there is a deep neurobiological reality to the importance of story that we all know culturally, but is becoming more and more obvious even in the realm of science. For example, there's a very interesting study that was done recently at Emory University on the effect of reading novels. Students' brains were scanned in a resting state each morning for the first 5 days of the experiment. They were then given 9 sections of a book. It was a plot-driven, trashy thriller about Pompeii. Nothing edifying, but that's the point. Over the course of 9 days, and they were asked to read a 30-page section every evening. Then they came into the lab the next morning. And before they were put into the MRI machine, the scientist, being intelligent, gave them a comprehension quiz. Because you know, students and their reading. Did you actually read and did you actually understand? If you did, you go into the machine, at which point they would scan your brain. And then 5 more days after that, they would scan the brain in a non-reading state, in a resting state. The results showed heightened connectivity in the left temporal cortex, an area of the brain which is associated with receptivity for language. So I am not an expert. There are experts here who know what this means better than I do. But what I understand from this is that effectively they were continuing to read in a sense, even after they had stopped reading. So that thing that the reading was doing to their brains was going on for days afterwards. One of the professors involved in this experiment said that even though the participants were not actually reading the novel while they were in the scanner, they retained the same heightened connectivity as if they were reading, even 5 days after finishing the book. And this was a trashy novel, so you can imagine what it would be like if it was a truly deep reading experience. Something like Dostoevsky, something that has the potential to really change you. In a series of articles and 2 excellent books, author Lisa Krohn makes a very compelling argument, also based mostly on recent research in neurobiology, that there is something wired into the human brain that makes it receptive to good storytelling. Story is how we make sense of the world, she says. Of course, this shouldn't be surprising, of course, because you've been told this again and again over the past 2 days in almost every single session that you've been to. But not only that, it's because story is how we were given the good news. Our Creator, knowing how He created us, told us stories in the form of parables. A very interesting study done in the early 20th century by a Norwegian scientist shows that some of the parables that Christ spoke used a structure of oral storytelling traditions that was common throughout the ancient world for centuries, even before His incarnation. So even down to the technical details of how He spoke His parables, He was telling us stories. I think that's profound, even though when I suggested this was an important thing to some people online, one person's answer was, "So?" This was an Orthodox person, by the way. Time to get back in the TARDIS. This begs the question, what kind of story should we be writing, all of us? There's an interesting conversation that was happening between 2 writers on an online journal on the Imaginative Conservative a few weeks ago. One article by a professor of literature, a good Christian man who was teaching good Christian children, he was complaining about the fact that all of his students came into class with vast stores of knowledge about C.S. Lewis and Tolkien. And he said, why can't we have a little more realism? Storytelling is puerile, it's infantile. I don't want for my children to live in a world where they think a bunch of trees will come and save them, is what he said. Of course, his point was that we should be teaching our children how to read widely and well, including the classics of 19th century realism like Dickens, Tolstoy, and Dostoevsky, a point which I think nobody would argue with, certainly not me. But then he said something that was a little odd. He said, doesn't fantasy or fairy tales in general, don't they distract the mind from reality, from the real world? Do they not plunge the reader into an alternate reality that fragments his experience of the real world? And almost immediately after that, another person, I can't remember the name, I think it's one of these Tolkien experts that keep showing up over and over again, says, no, that's wrong. Yes, of course we should be reading 19th century classical realist fiction. But if you read the theory behind Tolkien's using the fairy tale structure, the whole point is to bring people back into reality. Why? Because the modern world isn't real. The modern world is a machine. The modern world is automated. And we interact with the modern world very often in a mediated fashion through screens. How about I throw another number at you? Somebody counted these people. Why do they do this to themselves? Somebody counted the number of times an average American touches his smartphone a day. Any ideas? How many times? A million. 2,600 times a day. 2,600 times a day. That's the average, right? That's not going to the edges. I'm sure that's not true of any of you. But it is a truth about the way we interact with the real world. And this is also, I think, a problem that is reflected in modern realist fiction, with a few important differences. Cheryl Tuggle is right over there. She writes beautiful realist fiction. You should all read her book, Lights on the Under the Mountain, on the Mountain? On the Mountain. It's a very good example of how realist fiction can do good, beautiful things. Most of the time, realist fiction of our times is rooted to a certain kind of philosophical system. That philosophical system is completely lacking in transcendence. It's completely stuck on a flat, immanent plane. It has very little engagement with the possibility of the divine, of the transcendent. Take, for example, a recent Pulitzer Prize winner, The Goldfinch, which is going to be made into a movie soon. Beautiful language, incredible descriptions about stupid idiots doing the same unpleasant things to each other again and again and again and again until they all just fall over. And we're expected to read this for 700 something pages. No! Stop! Pulitzer Prize winner, people. This is, by and large, the level of the realist fiction that gets noticed. And this is the issue. There are beautiful realist novels being written by people of faith, but not many people are reading them. Because the vast majority of cultured Americans think they're being preached at anytime anybody says the word God, or if anybody suggests the possibility of transcendence. It's very difficult to convince somebody through the medium of realism. It's not impossible, it's just very difficult. Fairy tales, on the other hand, because they access a more primal part of our brain, one that isn't so stuck on rationalization, is able to get at those truths more directly, more quickly, and perhaps more effectively for modern people. It certainly would explain why Tolkien continues to be read so much, and also why so many people keep trying to insist that he's not a Christian, that's not a Christian book, even though it is. So I would really challenge all of you writers to explore the fairy tale as a medium. I know a lot of you want to, and you feel like you can't because Orthodox people don't write fantasy. Yeah, they do. Tolkien explains, and he says, fantasy is a natural human activity. It certainly does not destroy or even insult reason. It doesn't either blunt the appetite for or obscure the perception of science. On the contrary, the keener and clearer the reason, the better fantasy will it make. If men were ever in a state where they did not want to know or could not perceive truth, as in facts or evidence specifically, then fantasy would languish. If they ever get into that state, and it would not seem at all impossible, fantasy will perish and become morbid delusion. I'm thinking specifically of some people's reaction to seeing the movie Avatar, where they were so enamored of the CGI fake world that they kept trying to get back into it through various computer simulated programs until they would not eat and get sick and this sort of thing. And maybe some of you have heard that one person actually died after playing a video game. I can't remember what it was, Second Life or something. This is a while ago, but somebody was playing it for 48 hours straight and died. This is not, however, fantasy. That's morbid delusion. For creative fantasy is founded upon the hard recognition that things are in the world as they appear under the sun, or a recognition of fact, and yet not a slavery to it. That's very important. In any case, we need to clean our windows, says Tolkien. We've lost the ability to see the beauty of the world around us for various reasons, so that things seen clearly may be freed from the drab blur of triteness or familiarity. That triteness is the penalty of appropriation. The things that are trite, or in a bad sense familiar, are the things that we have appropriated, the things that we have come to know. They've become like the things that once attracted us by their shininess, by their glitter, their color, their shape. Then we took them, locked them in our hoard, acquired them, and stopped looking at them. Of course, does this mean that we should write nothing but fantasy? No. But there is definitely a sense that there should be a mythical element, an element of the hero's journey in almost everything that we write. And I'll show it to you. Which of the two is more popular in the culture? Marvel or DC right now? It's clearly Marvel. And what we're seeing is something really incredible. What we're seeing is a 10-year-long sustained run of interest from people who lose interest after 2.5 seconds. 10 years of coming back again and again and again to one long story. The individual movies sometimes aren't even that interesting, but it doesn't matter. The people kept coming, all of us, I think, many of us, kept coming back for the next one. Why? Because it was a mythic story. It was a hero's journey told in that mythical way. Compare it to Batman versus Superman, which was very realistic in some ways. It was rooted in gritty details. It was dark. It was gray in its morality. It avoided the kind of large sweeps of heroic thought and heroic action that you have in the hero's journey. Many people hated it. I couldn't watch it to the end. It definitely did not have the same kind of resonance. Neither do any of the DC movies, except perhaps Wonder Woman, but Wonder Woman follows the hero's journey very, very obviously. So it's like they got the memo finally, except it was a little too late. And there's a reason for this. Aristotle reminds us the 3-act structure, the plot-driven story, leads us to catharsis. It leads us to an ability to overcome difficulty and to approach healing, harsh reality, through virtue, through courage. And it works in real life. I have a story to tell you. It's a difficult story to tell. I asked some of my email subscribers to send me stories of themselves and their families, how they were affected by literature or art in some way. I received several good ones and I picked one. And you'll hear why in a second. This is from the point of view of the mother who was writing this. When my daughter Mary Evelyn was in 1st grade, my husband and I started reading the Chronicles of Narnia aloud to her at bedtime, starting with The Magician's Nephew. Each night we'd read a chapter. It was a sweet, comforting ritual. By the time we'd finished the 2nd or 3rd book, we discovered Mary Evelyn had relapsed with incurable cancer. The Narnia chapters continued for the next 9 months, providing continuity in the midst of what was an emotionally chaotic time. One day, we had a particularly difficult doctor's appointment. It wasn't difficult for Mary Evelyn because for once not much was done to her, but it was one of the worst for us because the doctor explained that there wasn't much we could do. He described our daughter as falling off the neuroblastoma cliff. That evening, at bedtime, we were reading the 2nd chapter of The Silver Chair, the part where Jill must trust Aslan as he blows her off a cliff and gently through the air to Narnia. What amazing timing. Mary Evelyn didn't live to finish the Narnia series. By the time we were starting the last battle, she was on morphine to deal with her pain. I remember her lying very still in the hospital room as her daddy softly read. Her older brother snuggled with her, avoiding all the IVs, and I sat in a hard chair, wrapped in a big sweatshirt, trying not to throw up from the stress of my grief. A simple act of reading aloud brought us together around the hospital bed and gave a calmer atmosphere to the room, prompting the nurse to note the peaceful, loving atmosphere surrounding our baby girl. A few nights later, Mary Evelyn asked us, "Am I going to die?" Some people don't tell their children the truth in moments like this, but we wanted her to face this with us, being able to talk honestly about what her body was telling her anyway. We told her that unless there was going to be a miracle, yes, you are going to die. She cried for a few minutes and said she didn't want to be separated from us, but we told her that time is different in heaven and that she wouldn't experience the separation. Time in heaven is like time in Narnia. It's outside of the time here on earth. For her, it might just be a few moments before we would once again be together. That calmed her down, and that she collected herself and smiled a bit and said, "Well, I'm a little excited to meet Aslan." She died a few days later. She died peacefully, surrounded by prayers and family. At the funeral home, a friend of mine, a friend of a friend, who was a stranger to me, named Cheryl, gave me a very long paper chain of prayers. Cheryl had created this chain at a large ministry conference in Atlanta. She had set up a table, provided strips of construction paper, and then asked participants of the conference to write down a prayer for Mary Evelyn. Then she stapled the prayers together to create a paper chain like you'd wrap around a Christmas tree. I'm telling you this for a reason. While they had been creating the chain back at the conference, the stranger had given Cheryl a little stuffed animal for Mary Evelyn. Cheryl said he had gone back to his car to retrieve the animal and wanted Mary Evelyn to have it. Cheryl brought the stuffed animal to the funeral home and gave it to me. That sounds like a bold thing to do, doesn't it? My child was dead. I had no use for a toy. But I did have a use for this toy. It was a stuffed lion. I felt like Mary Evelyn was saying, "I'm okay. I've met Aslan." I've thrown a lot at you. This is a remarkably tall order for Christians. As it is, we have to deal with our own salvation, much less thinking about creating a culture and saving the world around us. Because it requires each of us constantly to work on education, on our own education, to read, to write, to study, to meet with other Christians, to work on our craft, to push ourselves, to try different things, to write things that will never get published. And yet, even all that, it's not enough. Because we're actually supposed to do more. We're supposed to take on the world with the spiritual hands of our creative endeavors and then transfigure the world itself through our art. And we can only do that if God does it through us. How wonderful that Frederica gave us that image of the transparent book, because I have it right here written down. We have to be transparent so that God shines a light through us. And if we are going to do that, we have to embrace art as asceticism. Ivan Ilyin has much to say about this. He's a good Russian, after all. I will only include a little bit of what he has to say. He says, to create Christian culture, we have to ourselves become renewed. And only then can we take the world on with our hands. And this renewal is an evangelical one. We have to be renewed wholly to our very depths. This is not given to everyone. But to start walking on this path, or at least to try to step on it, this is possible, even necessary for all of us. In any case, it is for anyone who seriously thinks of Christian culture as a worthy endeavor. This renewal occurs in this way. When reading the Holy Scriptures, the reader must not simply register what he reads with his mind, but he must try to find and confirm in himself or herself that which is described in the text. If necessary, he must create that state from scratch. That means he must evoke within himself a state of mercy and then dedicate himself to it, to contemplate God's perfection with the heart and to abide in it until the heart and the will, the action of the conscience, are filled with it. To find within oneself the power of love and turn it even for a moment to God, and then to mankind and all that is alive. And yet, this is but a beginning. From this, according to the teachings of the Scripture, a pure mind in man not only comes alive, not only does the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, Philippians chapter 4, verse 7, flow into him, but an essential, actual unity of the soul with Christ and with God begins. For then God grants you, according to the riches of His glory, to be strengthened with might through His Spirit in the inner man, that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith. Then you will come to know the love of Christ, which surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled with all the fullness of God. Ephesians 3. In other words, it is possible, Elian continues, for man to have this grace-filled union with God in Christ on earth. Man can become a partaker of the divine essence. 2 Peter 1, chapter 1, verse 4. This communion and union are what give him and her their creative strength. This is an incredible thing to say. And Elian continues, while accepting this apostolic teaching to be true, there is no need to interpret it in a way that would lead to some kind of pride, arrogance, violence against others. On the contrary, this path requires of a person complete, unfeigned, sincere, total humility, sobriety, laborious effort, and asceticism. In other words, everything that is so fully revealed in our fathers, in the Philokalia, and that is brought most vividly into life by our saints and by the elders of our church. Of course, this means that only a few of us can actually reach the heights of that path. But seeking that path and coming close to it, it's enough. In fact, it's commanded. Especially to us if we seriously take up this call to create Christian culture. I said I was throwing a lot at you. This is really hard in any century. It is especially difficult now, in ways that we might not even realize. And I'd like to show you a short video.
I want you to imagine walking into a room, control room with a bunch of people, 100 people hunched over at desks with little dials, and that control room will shape the thoughts and feelings of 1 billion people. This might sound like science fiction, but this actually exists right now, today. I know because I used to be in one of those control rooms. I was a design ethicist at Google, where I studied how do you ethically steer people's thoughts. Because what we don't talk about is a handful of people working at a handful of technology companies, through their choices, will steer what 1 billion people are thinking today. Because when you pull out your phone and they design how this works or what's on the feed, it's scheduling little blocks of time in our minds. If you see a notification, it schedules you to have thoughts that maybe you didn't intend to have. If you swipe over that notification, it schedules you into spending a little bit of time getting sucked into something that maybe you didn't intend to get sucked into. When we talk about technology, we tend to talk about it as this blue sky opportunity. It could go any direction. And I want to get serious for a moment and tell you why it's going in a very specific direction. Because it's not evolving randomly. There's a hidden goal driving the direction of all of the technology we make. And that goal is the race for our attention. Because every news site, TED, elections, politicians, games, even meditation apps have to compete for one thing, which is our attention. And there's only so much of it. And the best way to get people's attention is to know how someone's mind works. And there's a whole bunch of persuasive techniques that I learned in college at a lab called the Persuasive Technology Lab to get people's attention. A simple example is YouTube. YouTube wants to maximize how much time you spend. And so what do? they autoplay the next video. And let's say that works really well. They're getting a little bit more of people's time. Well, if you're Netflix, you look at that and say, well, that's shrinking my market share, so I'm going to autoplay the next episode. But then if you're Facebook, you say, well, no, that's shrinking all of my market share, so now I have to autoplay all the videos in the newsfeed before waiting for you to click play. So the internet is not evolving at random. The reason it feels like it's sucking us in the way it is because of this race for attention. We know where this is going. Technology is not neutral. And it becomes this race to the bottom of the brainstem of who can go lower to get it. Let me give you an example of Snapchat. If you didn't know, Snapchat is the #1 way that teenagers in the United States communicate. So if you're like me and you use text messages to communicate, Snapchat is that for teenagers. And there's like 100 million of them that use it. And they invented a feature called Snap Streaks, which shows the number of days in a row that two people have communicated with each other. In other words, what they just did is they gave two people something they don't want to lose. Because if you're a teenager and you have 150 days in a row, you don't want that to go away. And so think of the little blocks of time that schedules in kids' minds. This isn't theoretical. When kids go on vacation, it's been shown they give their passwords up to 5 other friends to keep their Snap Streaks going, even when they can't do it. And they have like 30 of these things, and so they have to get through taking photos of just pictures or walls or ceilings just to get through their day. So it's not even like they're having real conversations. We have a temptation to think about this as, oh, they're just using Snapchat the way we used to gossip on the telephone. It's probably okay. Well, what this misses is that in the 1970s, when you were just gossiping on the telephone, there wasn't 100 engineers on the other side of the screen who knew exactly how your psychology worked and orchestrated you into a double bind with each other. Now, if this is making you feel a little bit of outrage, notice that thought just comes over you. Outrage is a really good way also of getting your attention. Because we don't choose outrage, it happens to us. And if you're the Facebook news feed, whether you'd want to or not, you actually benefit when there's outrage. Because outrage doesn't just schedule a reaction in an emotional time space for you. We want to share that outrage with other people. So we want to hit share and say, can you believe the thing that they said? And so outrage works really well at getting attention, such that if Facebook had a choice between showing you the outrage feed and a calm news feed, they would want to show you the outrage feed, not because someone consciously chose that, but because that worked better at getting your attention. And the newsfeed control room is not accountable to us. It's only accountable to maximizing attention. It's also accountable, because of the business model of advertising, for anybody who can pay the most to actually walk into the control room and say, that group over there, I want to schedule these thoughts into their minds. So you can precisely target a lie directly to the people who are most susceptible. And because this is profitable, it's only going to get worse. So I'm here today because the costs are so obvious. I don't know a more urgent problem than this, because this problem is underneath all other problems. It's not just taking away our agency to spend our attention and live the lives that we want. It's changing the way we have our conversations, it's changing our democracy, and it's changing our ability to have the conversations and relationships we want with each other.
So the video is a TED Talk by Tristan Thomas. You can all look it up. How a handful of tech billionaires, or something like that, I forgot the exact text of it, but basically are deciding what billions of people get to think. And the image that he uses is one of a control room with a bunch of knobs. And the knobs control the attention of every single person on the planet. This control room decides who gets to spend their time however they want, right? And imagine that control room is filled with only 4 people. And those 4 people are billionaire tech titans who have transhumanist tendencies and who do not like Christianity. Now imagine that these tech titans have the ability to decide what and when you do whenever they want. In fact, what they do, they're able to, through their notifications, through their beeps and little red flags, to effectively, as he says, schedule time in your day for you that you had not intended to schedule for yourself. What ends up happening is they understand that the new commodity in our time is human attention. Human attention gives them dollars, big ones. And the more attention we spend scrolling a newsfeed on Facebook, using the autoplay on YouTube, clicking 2,600 times on our phone, the more they get money. Because every single second of attention we spend on social media turns into advertising dollars. Immediately, automatically. Did you know that if you are doing deep work and you are distracted by a ping on your phone, that the effects of that distraction on your brain will last for 20 minutes? That's from one distraction. Do you know how many times you are distracted in a minute if you do not limit your machine's access to your attention? A lot. It effectively becomes impossible to focus long enough to do the kind of deep, intense work that culture creation requires. You are effectively giving free money to people who already have more than enough of it. We all are. Unless we take conscious measures against it. And I want to suggest 5 such specific things that you can do. These are mostly taken from a book that everybody should read. It's called Digital Minimalism by Cal Newport, who himself, ironically enough, is a professor of computer science. So he knows what he's talking about. He recommends a 30-day tech fast. That means no tech other than what is absolutely necessary for your daily survival and perhaps your business, which for many of us nowadays is a reality, internet business and all that. Everything that is non-essential, take it away. All personal profiles on all social networks, take them down for 30 days. Do not look at them. Remove them from your phone. Get rid of them. Deactivate your profile on Facebook for 30 days. Do it. After those 30 days, reintroduce them one by one based on what you think is necessary for you, and that's up to you, except ask these questions. Other than just what do I need, ask yourself, does this thing simplify my life or does it complicate it? And choose simplicity. Does it promote stillness or does it promote distraction? Choose stillness. After you've done that, turn off all notifications. That's number 2. Turn off all notifications on your phone, other than life emergencies from wife, husband, child, etc. You can do that. There are ways of, if you need technical support, just go to Google. Sorry. There's an even more extreme version of this. Take off all social media apps from your smartphone. I did it. I have no social media apps on my smartphone. I have no browsers on my smartphone, except when I travel. All I have is my Audible app, my podcast catcher, and a few business apps that I need, without which I couldn't do my business. I felt like Frodo right after Gollum died. Okay, I'm serious. It was such a freeing experience. As far as your desktop version of Facebook is concerned, what you can do actually is unfollow every single person that you are friends with. Don't unfriend them, unfollow them. Unfollow every page that you've liked. Use Facebook to post things that are important to you, or as Messenger, which is really how most people use it, and the rest of it is just mindless wasting of time. Do you know why? Because on your phone, the version of Facebook that's on your phone was specifically built to mimic slot machines. The little red notification thing, it gives you a dopamine rush. Dopamine being the neurochemical that gives you the pleasure of anticipation, not the pleasure of receipt of reward. And that pleasure, as you know, being good Christians, is endless. And yesterday I was talking to Father Alexis Schrader. He reminded me of a study done on rats where they were given a similar dopamine hit as a human being has when clicking on those notification status things. The rats received a little reward of dopamine every single time they clicked something. They did it until they died. They stopped eating. Of course, we're not rats. That's not the point I'm trying to make. The point I'm trying to make is that it has an intense effect on us on a biological level. A third thing you can do to become a digital minimalist is to track your time. Every day for a week, every half an hour, 15 minutes, stop what you're doing, pull out a notebook, and write down what you did. At the end of the day, at the end of the week, count the number of hours you've spent passively consuming nonsense. I did this. You want to hear what happened? Most of my work is done online, at home. I'm a freelancer for the most part. So every single minute that I spend in front of my computer at home is necessary for me to produce food for my 3 children. I did this on one day that was particularly difficult. I was very distracted. I wasn't dealing well with life. 4 hours on Facebook. 4 hours. And I'm driven. I don't know if you've noticed. So it's possible that some of you are similarly falling down a rabbit hole. This is important because no passive consumer can ever become an active creator. Then, the fourth thing you can do is schedule concrete time every day to read deeply, not on a screen. We know that when we read on a screen, our eyes follow something approximating an F pattern. We read the first few lines intently, we scan, then we remember that we're scanning, we read one line more deeply, then we scan again to the end. And we do not absorb the vast majority of what is written in that article. This is clearly demonstrated. You can find out about a write-down F pattern in your Google search. There are some very, very interesting studies about how people engage with online content. It also doesn't help that most online content is extremely hyperlinked. So you get to the middle of a blog post that you really like, and there's a hyperlink that sounds really interesting, and you click on that, and that one leads you to another one, and it's also hyperlinked. Oh, that sounds really good. Let's click on that. And 2.5 hours later, what? Where am I? Where's Alice? The fifth thing I want you to do is spend meaningful time face-to-face with people. We're doing it here, so I'm preaching to the choir a little bit, but I think all of us could actually take more time not to speak on the phone or text with the people that we want to know, the people we want to spend time with, but actually schedule time to meet them, to have dinner with them, to arrange retreats, conferences, on a smaller level than this. Choose community. Choose edification before entertainment, because we, unfortunately, have come to equate entertainment with culture. Jonathan Pajot, in his latest video, you all should all go check it out, Jonathan Pajot, The Symbolic World, a 45-minute lecture on culture, and he makes the point. Entertainment is not culture, and yet we think it is. The wonderful Sheeans and I have been working, yes, by the way, that was funny. Yeah, right, there we go. The wonderful Sheeans and I have been working on something that we'd like to share with you. It's still at a very nascent stage, something we're calling the Artifact Institute. We're interested in gathering culture creators of different... Here, I have a mission statement. Hold on. A group of culture creators who delve deeply into Christian culture and tradition to create new immersive experiences that would involve liturgy, visual art, music, literature, storytelling, architecture, craft, and conviviality, which is a euphemism for food, by the way. The idea being, we already have musical masterclasses that we do with Benedict and with others. They've been very transformative experiences because people who have had no experience of immersive culture suddenly come and sing together with all of us who do this singing all the time, and it moves them deeply, and they want to know more. They see that light and they want to know the source of it. So rather than just limit it to music, why not create events where we could have workshops for writers, for storytellers, for singers, for iconographers, who would then come together in a kind of village feast at the end of it all, and would sing together, dance together, tell stories together, would show their art together, and in the community would begin creating a kernel of that something that could perhaps then begin to grow. Yes, as Frederica said yesterday, it is probably going to be at the margins at this point. But the flowers on the edges are just as beautiful as they are in the middle. Artifact Institute, keep your ears perked up. Come and talk to me about it. Come and talk to Benedict about it, and Maria if you want. I'd be very happy to talk to you. Where, to St. Egan's? Oh, it's not a place, that's the problem. It is a virtual space. Not yet, it's not a place yet. The creation of a Christian culture is a task placed before humanity 2,000 years ago, and it has not yet been finished. It cannot be finished by any single age, any single people. It certainly won't be done only by us. Because all of us, every generation has to strive for it in their own way, even if that means that they fail in their own way. To become imbued with the Spirit of Christ's teachings, and then to pour out that Spirit, through our spirit, into the life and into the physical world, that is our calling. Then maybe, according to Solzhenitsyn, perhaps the old trinity of truth and good and beauty is not just the formal outworn formula that it used to seem to us during our heady materialistic youth. Perhaps the whimsical, unexpected branches of beauty will make their way through and soar up to that very place, and in this way perform the work of all three. And in that case, it was not a slip of the tongue for Dostoevsky to say that beauty will save the world. It was a prophecy. Thank you. Questions, please.
The TED Talk that we missed.
Look up Tristan Harris. Tristan Harris. He has 2 TED Talks. Watch them both. They're both very good. Tristan Harris. Question.
Can you also repeat a statement you made and I missed it? No passive consumer
Can be an active creator. Yeah. Question, please, Father.
I just have a small comment.
Louder, please. I can't hear you.
I just
That
have
doesn't amplify. It's for the recording.
No, I have a small comment. I don't think 30 days is going to work.
30 days?
We are Orthodox, right? So it has to be 40 days.
30 days isn't going to work. 40 days. We need 40 days. We're Orthodox. Please.
Hi, I'm really short. But, I'm a living dinosaur. I'm almost 40 years old, and I've never owned a cell phone.
Good for you.
It's not really a virtue. I'm just as distractible as anyone else. But my question is, whenever I am with people, every 5 seconds, they're not there anymore. They're touching a screen. And my question is, how are we to create Christian culture when we're no longer present to each other? We're not even present to ourselves.
The question is wonderful. It's how do we create Christian culture when we are not even present for ourselves anymore? Specifically talking about this phenomenon of distraction. So what I think is so interesting about this phenomenon of digital minimalism that I mentioned is that it is entirely backed and based on a secular materialist worldview. It's nothing but hard, positive science. And we can use this to our advantage. Because if people around us are not present, it's not a strange thing for us to say, have you read this book? It's called Digital Minimalism. Did you know what touching that screen does to your brain? Did you know that it has physical effects on your body? You're not preaching at them. You're explaining to them about something that is interesting, scientifically based, fully within their worldview. Yeah, do it gently, do it nicely, but I think that those conversations need to happen now. And they are being had. More and more people are talking about this. It's slowly beginning to filter into the mainstream. People are understanding when they wake up that something's wrong. And it can't go on like this. So I think this is the time to start talking to people. How do you do it? You talk. You talk, you show them love. You use the formula that Julia Frederica mentioned yesterday. You give them your love, your calmness, your patience, and then you tell them the truth. And you phrase it in a very easily digestible way. You use their own language. You use the language of science. You use the language of materialism. Because in this case, it's doing our work for us. And then later on, once they've gotten to that point, then you can start showing rather than telling what it means to be a creator. I think. Maybe something like that.
I have something I'd like if you could comment on. I've heard a couple of times recently in different contexts, and I'm sure farther back than that also, people actually writing, I think, not in speaking in person, but statements to the effect that fiction equals lies or lying. Yeah. And that's something that myself, I have a deep gut response to that's not right, that's not at all what it is. But I'm still working on trying to articulate why it isn't. Why, even though making up something that's not historically, factually accurate, it's nonetheless, there's nothing lying about it, even though it comes out of imagination. I'm curious if you have anything to say to that.
This is not actually as easy to answer as you would like. I talk about this a lot on my blog, so I do recommend that you go through some of the older posts. But yes, and go talk to Dr. Jenkins, who gave a talk about this specific thing, where he talked about the imagination as being an antecedent for meaning. Is that what C.S. Lewis said this? That in order to create meaning from the facts that you are given, you need to have an interpretive structure, which comes from imagination. It doesn't come from facts. So you need to have an imagination first and foremost, which means that capacity is capable of creating something that is fictional. And it's okay. Now, I'm going to go about this a little bit tangentially. And this might be a little bit shocking to a few of you, but I hope not. This is something I talked about on the Amon Sul podcast with Father Andrew. But this idea that fiction is false and nonfiction is true is actually firmly based in a materialistic mindset that doesn't allow for the possibility of a deeper metaphysical reality, okay? When we read the lives of the saints, especially from a certain time period, you will notice some funny things. In an interesting article by Evgeny Vodolaskin, who wrote the novel Loris, which I recommend everybody reads, it's fantastic. By the way, not a fantasy, although with fantastical elements. It's historical fiction, but with things that might be interpreted as fantasy, although it's not, it's just miracles. But anyway, he says in an article called The New Medieval Ages, or The New Medievalism, something like this, in First Things magazine, that there were two Saint... what's his name? Kirill. Two Saint Kirills in the Russian tradition who lived centuries apart. If you read their lives, they're almost identical. The reason is that the one who came later, his hagiographer, took elements from the previous Kirill's life and added it to the present Kirill's. Okay? This is clear. This isn't me, big scientist, terrible bad guy, making things up to discredit Christianity. No, this was a way of interpreting reality that is very different from the materialist worldview. It was natural for the second Kirill to have the same elements as the first because they have the same name. Duh! It was a different way of looking at time. Time isn't a linear thing. Reality isn't flat. It's indented. It folds back in on itself. And did you know that there are some saints for whom we do not have a historical trail? Any actual sort of history, whose hagiography was written centuries later and was basically invented because we don't know nothing about it. Saint Abirkius, a 2nd century saint, was an elaborate, wonderful Byzantine hagiography that takes from different hagiographies of the time. All we have from him is a reference to him on a stone stela that somebody found centuries later. That's it. That's all we know about him. And many centuries later, they made up a life. Is that fiction? No. Is that lies? No. It's hagiography. So it depends how you are writing your fiction. If your fiction is an expression of your worldview, which it should be, if it's an attempt to bring meaning into an otherwise meaningless, flat existence, how can that be anything except edifying? Otherwise, you're not living. Sorry, I'm getting riled up. Hi, Melissa.
Hello, Father. Well, I just wanted to, you were talking about the problem with screens a lot.
Yeah.
And, I have 11 kids, for those of you who don't know me. And so it's really hard for us where we live because we're really far away from other Orthodox communities. There are not a lot of people around us, and so my kids are really sucked into, like, they have a Google Hangouts with some other kids in different states. And so I think those things are good, and so I'm not going to make my kids give those up.
No.
But
Nor should you.
I unplug our router from 9 to 2 o'clock every day, and they just have to suck it up. Like, I don't really care what you guys are doing right now, but it can't evolve any electricity, and because the router's unplugged, there's nothing they can do about it. So, I mean, that's one of the ways that I kind of enforce this at my house, because, and that means that I can't also be scrolling Facebook between 9 and 2.
Yeah, we have to take the pills as well, you know?
Yeah, it works. And I babysit 2 kids, and they come from a family where they watch TV while they eat dinner, and they're constantly on their devices. And the first week of every summer when they're at my house, they like want to pry out their eyeballs. But the really good thing is by the end of the summer, they just take it as a gift, and this is what it is. And their mom always tells me that there's this really interesting transition at the beginning of the school year because they're like not on their devices all the time, they're doing things, and then like a month into school, then they're just like they were before. So, I mean, it lasts because they're like for the month of September, they're pretty used to it.
I mean, more and more you see things like summer camps for young people that are specifically unplugged, and especially for those who play Fortnite, they have like specific Fortnite, Fortnite specific camps. Fortnite is a multiplayer online game that has a tendency to absorb people into it, you know, as such things do. I can recommend a resource also for those who are interested in the reality of tech in our days. Father Josiah Trenum has a 10 lecture series from Patristic Nectar Publications called Master and Slave. Look it up. It's 10 lectures. It's very good. It doesn't go far enough sometimes, which for Father Josiah is saying something. But anyway, I love Father Josiah dearly.
Hi, I feel kind of out of my depth, but I was wondering, are you Russian or did you live in Russia? Because I lived in Russia, and I like a lot of what you said kind of touched me deeply, especially like when you were talking about conviviality.
Conviviality, yeah.
You know why? Because I think because there was 1,000 years of Christianity there, I think that there's a conviviality under, like, in the brain, even if people aren't going to liturgy. What you were saying about art and I can't remember where all my notes are, but you were connecting different aspects of life to liturgy, and you were talking about your Artifact Institute.
Yeah.
But I kind of think, like in Russia, it's kind of like the Matryoshka and like what Churchill says, a riddle inside of an enigma inside of a whatever.
Yeah.
Everything is multiply contextualized inside of something else.
Because they have such a long tradition of acculturated Christianity, which we don't have here yet.
Yeah, and now I forgot what I was going to say.
Yes, I am Russian, but I was born in San Francisco. Russian was my first language. We lived in a ghetto, not in the bad sense of the word, but in the sense that there's a lot of Russians in that area.
Because even the painter Malevich, who was maybe constructivist, early 20th century, abstract, even all the diversions that happened with Russian art in the early 20th century, even though if you didn't know anything about the culture, you'd look at it and think it was abstract art.
Yeah.
But a lot of what they were commenting on texturally in their minds.
If you're interested in the interplay of Russian folk, religious, historical culture, and all of this that we're talking about, I blog on this a lot on my own website, nicholaskotar.com. It's kind of what I'm interested in. I'm interested in, eventually, I don't know what form this is going to take, but what I'm really interested in is taking historical lessons from the way that culture happened in Russia, because there was a very intense struggle between paganism and Christianity. And then you had secularism come in very strongly in the beginning of the 18th century. And all that they started to dance with each other in very odd ways. And a lot of it was destructive and a lot of it was ugly and horrible, but a lot of it was very interesting and beautiful. So I talk about this a lot on my blog. I welcome you to come and read it.
Okay.
nicholaskotar.com.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Oh, it's my twin over there. Do you have a question, my twin? You're just leaving. Okay, fine. Please. Yeah, okay. Last question, okay, because we have Vespers. I'm sorry, yeah.
So I work in the tech industry, and I was recently at a lecture at Duke on augmented reality. And the lecturer was talking about how they were going to use how it's augmented reality makes it a lot easier to use analytics to adapt the programming so they can market to a person's psychology.
Yeah,
And
like retinal scans and things like this.
Talking about fantasy, I feel a lot like we are living in the land of lotus eaters.
Of what, sorry?
Lotus eaters.
Yeah.
Where the devices, the video games, everything is just...
That's a very good analogy, yeah.
Sucking people away from reality. And that's not going to change, especially with augmented reality and just the anticipation of how great that's going to be in the marketplace. So in regard to fantasy, can you speak to that and how that might be integrated into technology to pull people out into the reality?
If fantasy, games, books, movies, stories go into virtual or augmented reality, then that becomes more of a delusion. That's not fantasy. That's going to make us even worse lotus eaters than we are now. What I'm talking about is an experience of deeply reading a certain kind of story because of its inherent structure and how that structure reflects on our internal biology as well as our spiritual makeup. So that's the great strength of good fantasy writing, is because it is so intricate, because it can create a separate world with slightly different rules, all of which say something specific about the reality of our world. Not all fantasy does this, but most modern fantasy doesn't do this. So you have to be very discerning about what kind of fantasy you read. I am not arguing that fact. But the good fantasy, the immersive reading experience, the deep reading, it forces you to wake up to the world. Of course, you can have too much of a good thing in all cases. But there's something about that kind of storytelling that wakes you up specifically to reality, to the way that the grass is green, translucent green in early spring and dark forest green towards the end of August. Those kinds of things that we don't notice because we're looking at the world like this. So I'm talking specifically about reading. If we stop reading, our society will collapse. And I'm talking about deep reading. So it's important that we not only read on screens. Reading on screens is not the same as reading on paper. It can be demonstrated now physically. It's not just a matter of taste. And people who have done it long enough, you hear it again and again. Young people prefer to read fiction on paper because fiction doesn't read well on e-reading devices. It's a different reading experience. So quick bullet point nonfiction type things work pretty well on screens because you don't have to focus too much. Paper, well, it's true. It's true. Yeah, Audible is a different thing. I don't know much about how listening to a story can impact you. My sense is that you don't. If you're listening to a story on Audible and you're doing something else, it's easy to get distracted. So if you're in a car and doing nothing other than listening, it's an extremely immersive experience, and it's a very profound experience of story. It can be if it's read well. Of course, you can crash then if you get too immersed, but. It's true. Mankind has consumed stories orally, but sitting in one place and not moving around and doing things while they're listening. So yes, if you want to sit in place in a dark room, make a fire pit. I do that too. Yeah, and maybe augmented reality can work in that sense. Put on your glasses. There's a storyteller dressed in, I don't know, like furs and holding up a meat horn and telling you a story where you don't move and do anything. Maybe that'll be good. I don't know. No idea. It's an interesting time to be alive anyway. Thank you, everybody. We have to go.